Welcome part 4 to the finish line. Crossing the finish line with a contract to purchase, crossing the finish line when you finish the due diligence process, crossing the finish line when you feel very comfortable that you're going to finally close or seal the deal, and then all of a sudden things happen. It's very important. This one's going to be a little rather lengthy. I've been trying to keep them to a certain sequence until we get to the grand finale, because you need to be prepared that when you think everything's in line, that's when things are going to fall apart. It is normal for a transaction to fall apart 6 or 7 times, and it's very difficult to keep your emotions in track. Normally in a due diligence process, it's going to be automatic that the buyer will get to meet several key customers to make sure that they don't have any problem. Sometimes they don't do that, and then all of a sudden the light bulb comes on and you're in the contract to purchase, and they bring it up. And it throws everything sideways. And of course you can get emotional and say, well, you should have said this in the due diligence process. I'm not going to take you out to my customers. We don't know if a deal's going to close. It's normal. It's customary. They have the right if you have a large customer. And consequently, you've gone all the way almost to the finish line, and now you've got a decision to make. I will tell you that any buyer that's buying your company based on a strategic basis for growth, they're going to want to talk to key customers. And if you don't want them to talk to key customers, you're not going to close the deal. It's not that they don't believe that you have the relationships, but they want to make sure that the relationships will stay intact, even if you're there, because ownership changes. And I'll give you a fine example. I can't mention the company, but there was a company that had 40% of the business. The contract was approved, the lease agreements were approved, the employment agreement was approved. They wanted to wait until everything was approved before they took them out to the customer. They went out to the customer, and the customer said, if you sell the business, we will find another provider. So the deal was killed. But more importantly than that, that let that seller know he is captive to that client for the rest of his life. In other words, that client, that shipper, is saying, you do not have the right to create any shareholder value, and if you do, we're going to get rid of you. That's a reality. This should have been done a lot quicker, but the seller had made this a prerequisite that everything was approved, so all they had to do was go out to the customer. So don't be surprised if you have a large customer that this comes up. Even if it didn't come up in the due diligence process, it's going to come up now. It's normal, it's a reasonable request, and if you don't want that to happen, then you're most likely, what you're saying is, I don't believe that I can control my customers once I'm sold, so therefore I want you to give me all your money and you take all the risks. It's not going to happen. So be prepared to deal with that, and be prepared to deal with that in the beginning instead of the end. But a lot of times it comes up to the end and it ruins the deal. Now let's talk about the actual contract to purchase. If you're a trucking company, you're going to be required to provide a debt-free balance sheet. In other words, the buyer is going to pay for the equipment based upon agreed upon price. They're going to pay off the debt. Well, you have to know what that debt is at the day of closing on each piece of equipment. And you think that's easy, but it's not. The lender may say, okay, here's the payoff as of such and such a date, or we'll get back to you in 10 days. If you don't have the exact date payoff as of that date, you're not going to close, because their lender is going to want to know exactly what the specifics, so they can wire the money and pay off the debt. They want to make sure there's no late charges. They want to make sure that there's no cancellation provisions. And without that final number from the bank in writing, they're not going to release it. If you have equipment that's paid for, you must be able to give them titles at day of closing. And what happens, I won't mention the banks, but they say you'll have the title in 2 days. 3 weeks later, the titles aren't there and they can't close. Now, in some cases, you can speed up the process, go over the local lender's head, speak to the supervisor, the manager of the entire department, and say, look, we're closing on such and such a day. I need a letter in writing from you that the titles on these things have been paid off, and that we will get the titles within a certain date. We've gone down to the wire, our clients, on closings because the bank took this kind of stance and they didn't do what they were supposed to do. I'm not saying all banks are like this, but I'm telling you that this could happen. When you get to the point of the real estate contract, once again, hopefully someone that is negotiating your lease has real estate experience. Sometimes you may be required to use two different attorneys. In most cases, most law firms have a real estate department. You just want to make sure that your advisors know that it's their job to get you across the finish line. Don't run the red flags. Don't incur additional costs, because there's no contract that's perfect. And the last thing is, if there's an employment contract, realize that it can be terminated for cause. Realize that a non-compete is part of the purchase price. 9 out of 10 times you get close to closing, and then one accountant says, oh, well, I understand you're selling, but what are you getting for your non-compete agreement? You do not get money for a non-compete agreement. If they call it a non-compete agreement, they're just taking that pool of money and they're placing it someplace else. When you sell your business, it's automatic that you're going to have to sign a non-compete agreement, and it's automatic that the day you leave the company is when the non-compete agreement starts. So in closing, if you want to cross the finish line, in closing, if you really do want to sell your trucking company, in closing, be prepared for the unprepared. Be prepared for the unexpected. Be prepared, be prepared, be prepared, and whatever you do, never give up. Until next time, thank you for attending the finish line.